Hey, how's everybody doing? It's another episode of Film Streak. And, we're wrapping up 2025 here. That's what we're doing in this episode. There's a lot of films, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. But this new kind of, I don't know, schedule, this new way of doing episodes, I kind of like it. So I'm going to probably stick with it for a while. But let's get into some films. There's a lot of ground I want to cover here, as I'm starting to do with all of these. But in particular, I want to look at everything that we kind of got to at the end of 2025, and some of this is a little earlier in the year or throughout the year. But there's a lot of films here that, honestly, there's a point where I wonder, like, are films are they taking a hit? Whether you're talking about going to the theater, or you're talking about the types of films, the quality of the films, the work that is being out there or being made and put out into the world these days, and by these days, maybe the last few years, is it changing? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? There are some times when I look back at previous years and I think, oh man, that was a really good movie year. That was a year where everybody seemed to be on the same wavelength, or just kind of had the right energy, where you're getting such interesting and diverse and audacious work. This year, I don't know if I could really say that. I've looked at a lot of films over the year, and this roundup here, this group of films, this is kind of this is a pretty wide sampling of stuff that came out in 2025. I don't think I really enjoyed, and enjoyed is kind of loosely used, but I don't feel like these are really up there in terms of the quality, or even in terms of some of the storytelling, some of the craft. Let's just get into some of these, okay? Some of these, there are comedies, there's action, there's science fiction, there's a couple of documentaries in here, maybe. But I'll just kind of run through them all. No particular order, really. Although a couple of them fell at a certain time for me. Friendship, The Naked Gun, Nobody 2, The Lost Bus, Weapons. That was earlier in the year. The Long Walk, Tron Ares, Jurassic World Rebirth, which that came out earlier in the year. I didn't see it until just recently. Predator Badlands, which okay, I got you. Eddington, which I think came out earlier in the year also, but I was just very hesitant to watch it because I felt like it was just such a loaded film. A couple of films that I watched right around Thanksgiving. John Candy, I Like Me. That was off of watching Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and that just kind of got recommended to me, and I thought I'd give that one a shot. House of Dynamite, which is kind of coming in right at the end of the year here, and I think, I don't know how I feel about it yet, but Caught Stealing from earlier in the year, Babygirl from earlier in the year, The Running Man, Roofman, Wake Up Dead Man, a lot of mans, and then of course The Creature of Man, Frankenstein. These are quite a bit of films I've seen throughout the year, and some of these films I don't really know if I have a lot to say about, let's say, half of them, but I'll go into a couple. Weapons was one that earlier in the year, that really kind of struck me as something special, something different, but also kind of reminiscent or feeling very familiar to other things in the past. And yet it really is kind of its own creature, even down to the title being kind of open to interpretation, especially with a couple things that happen in the film. And, this is Zach Cregger, who directed Barbarian, wrote and directed that. And so just knowing that alone, that was really kind of, I felt like that was the only selling point to this film. Is like, this is from the guy who made Barbarian. And if you know what Barbarian is, it kind of gives you an idea of what you might get with this. And so going into weapons, I wasn't sure what to expect other than it was some sort of horror adjacent thriller or mystery. And it had something to do with children, and it had something to do with the school teacher and the parents. And what is that all about? And it sounds like that could be a little bit of a hot button thing of like something happening in the school with young children, some sort of tragedy or whatever. But this film really kind of goes in a bunch of different directions. It really takes the narrative that is kind of driving everything, and it shows you this from different perspectives, from different characters at different moments in time. It's not just showing you the same moment from these different points of view. You're getting one pass at this story, and then you're getting a second pass, which maybe gives you different information, and it happens at different points in time. And it's a really kind of tricky puzzle that this film works with, the sort of time limit, the timeline of it all, but also the dynamic between the characters and how they know each other and what they are trying to do either for themselves or for another character. And I got to say, it was not without a giant surprise at some point in the film, and it's kind of played for effect in the sense of like it's a horror film, but it's even deeper and maybe more disturbing than just like a monster, right? It is about like the nature of society and how we can manipulate each other and have others do things on our behalf, even without them being willing participants and that kind of thing. And so it was a really interesting kind of fun way to explore that with some of the tropes of like horror films and all that. But I thought it was really well done. I gotta say, it's for coming out so much earlier in the year. That came out like during the summer, I think, right? Like earlier, or maybe a midpoint of the year. And I just felt like it has really stuck with me. I haven't watched it again yet, but I think I probably will pretty soon here. Another one that I talked about, well, I didn't talk about it, but another one that I watched was The Long Walk, which, I knew it was based on a Stephen King short story. I really couldn't remember too much about it, but seeing the film, it seems pretty clear to me like this is something that it may have just been in the air in, let's say, like the 80s and 90s, because that's when you have stuff like even The Running Man, right, which is another film here. You have this idea of a society or a nation that has kind of started to eat itself, right? Like in this case, you've got the government is basically making these young boys, I say young boys, but like 18 years old or whatever they are, one from each state, and they all have to go on this walk until they drop, until there's only one left. And that one is the winner of the long walk. And it's a pretty harsh and brutal and really dystopian version of maybe some real things that are happening in our reality. But the idea that young people or children are sort of, I don't know, they're sort of commoditized. They've become like a thing to trade in. And in this film, it's for, let's say, entertainment or for propaganda even. But, of course, I think the metaphor could stretch even further. It's like into some really dark territory of, the idea that young people are being just abused and I would say, just misused as a group in society. That's not an easy thing to tackle, especially in what, this kind of feels science fiction-y, even though it seems pretty plausible in today's culture. Like there's no like magic kind of technology really behind it. It feels pretty much like this could happen tomorrow, which maybe makes it more scarier. The Running Man, on the other hand, which the film that came out in the '80s with Arnold Schwarzenegger, I always thought that film was corny. There were some parts of it that I kind of liked, especially younger when I saw it. But I watched it like maybe 2 years ago, and it doesn't hold up. And even some of the kind of camp sort of '80s action elements of it, they don't even hold up. And so I was really excited about seeing Edgar Wright doing his version of it, because Edgar Wright is already a filmmaker that I'm familiar with his work, and I really, really enjoy some of his films, like to the point where they are so far up on the list for me. I think for me personally, The World's End is so far up in terms of my favorite films. And yet I think it's kind of overlooked for the most part. I think most people probably still hang on to Shaun of the Dead or maybe Scott Pilgrim. Baby Driver was another one that I really enjoyed. I really liked the creativity and the craft in it. Even the storytelling was kind of fun, but also serious. And I think, it's just a shame that it's really kind of just tainted by having Kevin Spacey in it. It's really hard to kind of rewatch that film now. But on The Running Man, I feel like there's a couple of things that work for the film, but then there's some stuff that just doesn't really quite line up for me. And I think one of those things in particular is Edgar Wright's, his apparent kind of voice, his particular tone that he seems to strike with most of his films. I don't know that it was so much in Last Night in Soho, because that one really seemed like it was aiming for a very specific kind of homage to either giallo or like kind of classic mystery thriller films or even horror films. Stuff like Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, all those other films, that Cornetto trilogy for sure, they are serious, they're well done, they have a certain like energy and a pace to them, but they're also kind of fun. Whether the characters are having fun or, it doesn't always just, it's not an outright comedy the way he makes his films, but there's a lot of humor and a lot of sort of just the sort of rhythm that it has, plays like comedies sometimes. And this one, The Running Man, it doesn't do that. It plays like straight up serious dystopian science fiction, futuristic action film. And it has some moments in it, and I think it has a lot of like texture in it that feels like it, but it never like leans that way. It always leans against it, like into like the violence of it, into the energy of it. There's really only a few moments in the film that I found that it actually kind of sits and says, see, watch, like just enjoy this for a minute. This is actually going to be amusing. And so for as much as it's closer to the original story from Stephen King, and it's far better done like in terms of production and the quality of like the action, the stunts, the visual effects and all that stuff, I just feel like it's missing some, it's like the mix is off, And that's not to say, like, if I didn't know Edgar Wright made the film, I probably would have somehow enjoyed it more for what it was versus maybe what I was expecting, right? And so I don't know. I'm curious what other people's maybe thoughts on it are, and what their history is, like with Edgar Wright in particular as a filmmaker, because I really enjoy his films. And even just listening to him talk about films or watching interviews, he just seems like the kind of person that is so kind of insightful and smart, but also knows how to have fun. And there's a sort of like a jolly nature that comes across that I feel like it works in most of his films. I just don't think it really works in this one. And so, if I go to a couple of others here, Tron Ares was one that I really wanted to enjoy. I mean, there was a lead up to this film for me that honestly didn't have anything to do with really Tron itself, the story of Tron, the franchise, whatever. It had more to do with Nine Inch Nails, I gotta say. I went to a Nine Inch Nails show on their tour in 2025 here, and I was just blown away by the show itself, but also there was a certain tint to everything that felt like it was connected to this film. Even the show itself, right? The actual stage show, the light show, everything that had to do with that evening, there was a lot of black and red and a lot of I don't know, call it science fiction-esque imagery and feel to everything that was there. And it just seemed very intentional, like this is meant to somehow evoke or connect you to this film coming up and the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack to the film. And I gotta say, listening to the album itself for Tron Ares, the actual soundtrack album, I like this film. I like what it conveys. Not just the music itself, yes, but the sort of feeling and the tension and the energy of the album makes me feel like I like this film. But actually sitting and watching the film and kind of going through the story of it and understanding who these characters are, it just did not work for me. And it even comes down to the kind of final conclusion of it all. And the best I would say is, for me, Tron is a franchise, and I mean, going back to the original film, that addresses and explores what the dynamic is between, let's say, man and machine, right? Between the real world and the virtual world. And artificial intelligence is in all of these films in some way or another. But I think for this film, especially to come out right now, where artificial intelligence isn't some sort of magical thing, it isn't even theoretical. I mean, it is a thing that it more or less exists to some degree, maybe not fully and completely, but it is a thing that people deal with kind of every day now in some form or another, right? And so this film, I thought, was really going to explore, where do we, as let's say people or man or whatever, where do we draw the line on this thing? And it does do that. It tries to address it, but I think the resolution of it is AI, if we can bring it into the real world, is that a good thing? Do we want that to be a thing that's just out on the loose? And the answer to that being yeah, because reasons. I just felt nah, I think you landed on the wrong side of this debate or this question, let's say. And of course, the only time's going to tell, right? But I think, there's something to zagging on this kind of thing, because we've seen so many films that go in that direction of we're going to play with technology and we're going to see what happens, and then it's going to go foul, and then we're going to have to try and destroy it now. Everything from 2001 to Jurassic Park to The Matrix, it's been all throughout films in science fiction genres and beyond, right? And so this film is actually saying, no, we're going to find a way to live together. That's a pretty big zag. And I just think it didn't make enough of a compelling argument when the thing it all hinges on, this whole film, the whole story of this, relies on you caring and rooting for the character of Ares, played by Jared Leto. And man, I know Jared Leto can do acting. He's an actor. He's done interesting work in other films. I just talked about a film he did, I don't know, a few episodes back. That, what was it called? The Outsider, I think. And it was kind of an interesting story, if I remember right. And I felt like, oh, he's doing work in this. In Tron Ares, I didn't see it, man. I just felt like he's playing the kind of traditional or stereotypical like AI entity, right? Like this kind of robotic, kind of like almost like autistic character who doesn't understand how to deal with conversation or deal with other people. And not that that couldn't be you couldn't shape that into something people would care about, like an audience would want to see succeed. But I don't know, there's something that was just so not connecting with me with that character and why I needed to care about that character, that it eventually kind of undermines the premise of the entire film, I think. And I couldn't get on with it. I feel like there's some really cool like visual effects and some really interesting filmmaking in it. And even the fact that it kind of loops back all the way back to the original film from, what was that, 1982 or something? That it really does make the effort to connect itself to the original film. I thought that was, a nice touch, because I feel like that was the problem with Tron Legacy. I went back and rewatched these other two films before Tron Ares, and it's still, those films, the first film never connected with me. I've watched that film maybe at this point 4 or 5 times now, and I still kind of really don't retain what happens in the film. I kind of remember a lot of things that I remember a lot of moments and how it looked, the style of the film, which I know was groundbreaking at that point in time. But as far as like the characters and their motivations and like why the world is this and why these characters are doing this, it never has really stuck with me. And then I went and watched Tron Legacy, and that was kind of the same thing. I've seen that film, I think, 3 times now. I still don't really know what happens in that film. I get like it's a little more connected to the original because the character in that is the son of Flynn, Jeff Bridges' character in the original film. So there's the sort of like a legacy aspect of it. But it just feels hollow to me. Both of those two films do. And I give it this for Tron Ares. Tron Ares at least feels like it's trying to be its own thing, but also connecting in a deeper way to the original film. Because it's not about, oh, well, this person is the son of somebody. Although that is in Tron Ares. It is more about the concepts of the original film and how those concepts, or let's say the technology and all that stuff, has evolved and found its way to 2025, for instance. And that's a more interesting thing to explore to me versus like, father and son issues or whatever. But then to come down on the side that it comes down on and the sort of resolution of it all, I just feel like, nah, it didn't really work. There's just something missing for me. And I know the film kind of caught a lot of flack because it just took a nosedive when it came out. I can't say what that is for like the rest of, for other movie-going audiences. I know for me, it was just like, it wasn't as great as I thought it could be. It wasn't even a thing of like, it had to really work, but I just felt like it had so much leaning kind of in its favor that somehow it just didn't connect all these things. So I don't know. It's kind of a lot of talking about a film that I really didn't enjoy that much, but it was one that I really had high hopes for, and it didn't work out. Another one that I don't know if I had high hopes for, but Predator Badlands, I felt like off the heels of Prey, this is an interesting way to take this franchise in a whole new direction. Is you make the Predator the protagonist, and you make this whole thing set on some other planet, and there's a whole other world, just another sort of culture and ecosystem to explore here. We leave humanity behind. Like there are no people in this film. And by that I mean there are no humans in this film. There is the character played by Elle Fanning in this. She's a synthetic, straight out of Aliens, or the Alien universe, from the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. And the other, I guess, human-like characters in this film are also synthetics. So, I guess that's how it earned the PG-13 rating is, oh no, this Predator is still it's going to wreck shop, but there's not going to be any red blood on the screen. So, okay, I guess you don't need an R for this. And, I got to say, it feels like a little bit of a cop-out, but at the same time, it works for this story, I think. It makes the story a little more fun, You can kind of detach a little bit from how scary the Predator could be, and you instead look at more of like how capable and how powerful and clever the Predator can be, which is something that, in the very first film back in, what was it, 87 with Arnold and all those big dudes, it's like you didn't know anything about the Predator, but you could kind of just deduce like, oh, this thing is a killing machine, and it's smart, and it knows stuff, and it knows how to do stuff. But you don't really get a sense of how or why that is. And maybe that's better, to have the mystery. It makes it more suspenseful, because you don't even know what you're up against. But in Predator Badlands, the idea of like, no, there's a whole culture that makes this into this. I feel like there's some metaphor going on there, of like, how do you train someone, a character, let's say, to become a killing machine? You put them against the biggest threats imaginable, and you put them in the settings that are kind of impossible to survive, and you give them really no quarter, and if you can make it through that, well, I guess you're kind of set. And so, there's some stuff in there about that. Really, it is just more of a fun ride in a way. And I guess I do like the idea that it kind of leaves an opening for more of it. Not just maybe another Predator film where we get to see humans again, and maybe it's even back on Earth again, but we get to see, the potential is there to get to see more of the, the Yautja society or culture, and we get to know more about how they operate and what their like rules are. And why is this a society of killers, right? We didn't really get that deep into it, but the idea that could be explored, okay, I'll take that over Alien versus Predator, where really it's all about the people in between the two of them. that's just such a shoehorned idea. Those films should have never been made, I think. Some other films here. Eddington, Eddington was a film that I'd heard so much about. I'd seen stuff about it, the coverage of like, oh, this is like really hot button. It's talking about kind of a little bit of like a period film from only 5 years ago in the middle of the COVID pandemic and what this was doing to people, and specifically in this case, like a sheriff in a small town in, was it Arizona, New Mexico, somewhere in the Southwest. And the mayor of this city, of this small little town, that they kind of find themselves at odds with each other. And why is that? And what can be done about it? And what are the people of the town? What is their sort of read on it? And you could say, well, some of this is kind of hyperbolic. It's really stretching some of the real life debate and the circumstances that we were seeing to some kind of extreme ends. But I mean, there's value in this. There's real substance to what these characters are doing and what they're feeling. I think the idea that it's all in this sort of fictional town with this looming overhead over the whole thing is this fictional corporation that is trying to build a data center. And while that is a real thing and is very relevant to 2025, in 2020, during the middle of COVID, I don't remember that being such an important thing that people were all up in arms about. Maybe it was. It wasn't in my neck of the woods. Instead, it was more about, where the hell do I get toilet paper? And why do I got to wear this stupid mask? And I don't need no shots. This ain't even real. That's the kind of stuff I was seeing. And that's the kind of stuff that had me worried. This film kind of jumps into some of that a little bit. But I think it comes down on the... It kind of comes down on the premise that, if you push people far enough and you, let's say, not even push them, but you constrict them tight enough, they will push back and they will try to break out of that, and they will do some pretty disastrous things. Even if they are not equipped or prepared for what comes after that, people will break. And of course, I know we saw that, right? We saw instances of that, whether it's some Karen tearing up, a Target store, or like actual protests and things that were happening after the George Floyd incident. And, and even that is in this film to some degree. There's enough in here that I feel like it's topical, it's relevant, it's very. I could see it even being a little triggering for some people, if those were things that you were like in the middle of as they were happening. But I just feel like all of this kind of playing out in this fictional setting with these fictional characters. It feels like, for whatever reason, maybe this is just me bringing something else to the party, but this is Ari Aster. This is, a filmmaker. I like some of his work. This film in particular, it feels like it has just enough of like a flavor of fantasy that I think it kind of undermines the relevance of it, and maybe even like the seriousness of it. It feels like it's just kind of pretending all of this, but with real things that happen, real history, real elements of our society. But this is all kind of just for pretend. in some strange way. I don't, that's probably not the right way to say it. So something about it just disconnected with me. You know, I just felt like I could see like, oh, this is like a storyteller telling a story. This is not really showing us a moment in our reality. Versus, to me, something like one battle after another that doesn't, at least to my mind, it doesn't do that. It feels like, no, you're watching these characters go through this moment in time, in our culture, in our society, whether it's, you know, in the early segment of that film or, you know, the rest of the film that takes place present day. You're seeing them deal with real things and real concerns and like cultural kind of touch points, right? And of course, they're fictional characters, and a lot of what they're dealing with the Christmas fat mans or whatever they're called, I forgot now. But they are fictional, of course, but there's a reason why I think that's fictional versus what is in Eddington is fictional. And so, you know, for me, that was the only place where I just kind of felt like, nah, I get it, but I don't know if I really think it's as entertaining. And speaking of fictional things that are super hot button topics, I mean, House of Dynamite, that's one that I saw and I just thought, oh, wow, you're really going there. You're going to give us like the full, like Paul Greengrass, like documentary style look at how does government, society, just people who are in positions of power and control, how do they manage this like ultimate crisis for our country? And it has a very authentic feel and a sense of being like researched and carefully crafted, like in terms of the characters and the stories and the locations and all of the processes, the procedures that likely or in reality play out when this kind of thing could happen. And so it builds to a really compelling climax of all of these different characters seeing this moment happen in real time and either knowing what to do and not being able to do it, or not knowing what to do, or knowing all these things are going to have to fall in place and watching them not work. And so, you know, it really works in terms of turning that screw and just building that tension. And then to end with like a cut to black. And I get it. You know, I've seen a couple things from like the writer and Catherine Bigelow, the filmmaker here, to say like, well, you know, you need to decide the viewer, the audience needs to decide the ending of this. I mean, all right. I guess. I mean, are you making an entertainment or are you making a social studies lesson? You know, do you want me to come away from this thinking about what happened in your story, or do you want me to think about what could happen in the real world? Maybe that is the intention, and that's a valid approach. I just feel like that's like top class, like edging work right there, man. You understand what I'm saying? It's like you're gonna take me there, but you're not gonna get me there. I just don't know any other way to put it. So whether it's something like that or, you know, the other two, the most recent of all of these were Wake Up, Dead Man and Frankenstein. And both of those films, I like the filmmakers. I like Rian Johnson. I like Guillermo del Toro. I like the work that they've done. their approach to telling stories and the thought and the sort of intricacy of not just like the craft that they have in their films, but the level of characters and texture that they give in so many of their works. And it's all in these two films, but there's something about these both of these really, like they fit the right mold, but they just seem a little bit like hollow inside. Like I feel like they're doing all the things, they're going through all the right motions, but it just feels like there's no real heart in them. And I get, Wake Up Dead Man, it's really tackling some issues of faith and belief, and whether it's on a religious level or on like more of a spiritual or emotional level, it's tackling that kind of theme. Frankenstein, I've never read the original book, the Mary Shelley novel, but I have to kind of presume that this film is trying to stick pretty close to that. I don't know about necessarily the structure of it, but I think the themes for sure and the characters, of course. But there's something that just feels fantastical, and I get it. It is a fantasy. It's not meant to be anything literal necessarily. But it doesn't seem to have a certain weight that I was expecting. I don't really know. I can't really put a finger on it. It's beautiful to look at. It's mesmerizing. It's also pretty violent and powerful in those ways. Some moments are actually pretty shocking. But there's just there's an emptiness to it, to both of these films, I think. And yet on the surface, on paper, I feel like it works, but it just didn't really connect for me. I don't know what it is. The last thing I really want to talk about here, the last film of all of these, I could go in some of these others, but the one that really kind of worked for me, surprised me, was way more than what I thought it could be. Just hearing the premise alone was Roofman. And that's a film that it sounds really simple and even kind of maybe just uninteresting if you look at the premise of it. It's about a man who kind of has to go into hiding. He's a criminal who escapes prison, and he just has to hide so he doesn't get caught. And he hides in a toy store and kind of lives his life like that for a while. And it sounds more like a comedy, like a straight up comedy from like, the late 80s or 90s, but it's played with such nuance and such care. And I gotta say, it's one of those films that reminds me that, Channing Tatum, like he can really act. He's not like just, a pretty boy or like, a dude who's like, can do like the dance stuff and all that. Like he can really bring a character. He can really bring some weight to a performance. And, given it's based on a true story, part of it seems like so extraordinary. Like there's no way this actually happened. And I'm sure some of it's kind of fudged for the film, but there's still enough like kind of grounding to it, and I think a lot of that probably has to do with the writer and director here who, Derek Cianfrance, is that his name? Derek Cianfrance, who, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Sorry, bro. But I know the other film that he made that I really enjoyed, which also kind of works in this same way, is The Place Beyond the Pines. And that is a film that, I've gone back to over the years, and I really, every time I watch it, I'm like, oh man, this just hits better and better. And this one kind of works in that same way. It's not flashy. It's not it's got craft to it, but it's not in a way that draws your attention to it so much. You know, like Place Beyond the Pines, it has some kind of interesting filmmaking in it. Even some very kind of impactful one-take shots. And this one does too. But for the most part, it is about this character and his real kind of struggle with who he is and what he's done and what the consequences of it all are. So that's probably the winner for me. You know, this is a bunch of films, and so, you know, I may look back at some of these at another point and really connect with them in the right way or in a different way and find a different appreciation for them. But in the moment, in all the mix of everything that I've seen this year, a lot of these films just really didn't work so well for me. You know, I think the one that I probably connected with, let's say out of this group, the one that I really connected with the most is probably John Candy, I Like Me. Part of it is because it's a documentary and it's about a real person and it's really chronicling not just, you know, his career, but a lot of things behind the scenes with his family and other things he was doing outside of film. And it's an interesting look at a man's life, and a man's life that was cut short, you know. And also, you know, I'm recording this sort of mid to late December, and the news of the horrible tragedy of things that have happened with Rob Reiner and his wife and their family. You know, that's another instance of someone who's talented and regarded and likable and a master at their craft. And not to say Rob Reiner was taken too soon, although he was. I mean, he was not a young man, but there was still work there. There was still talent there that we would have likely seen more great work come out of him. And if nothing else, just to be a presence, to be an icon in Hollywood. And the same thing with John Candy is like there's so much that there was still promise of more things to come from him, but also just the man himself. This documentary really painted an interesting picture of how he affected those that were around him and how the memory of him kind of lives on through his work, but also just the experience that people had being in his presence. So I think that one really connected with me in an interesting way as a father, as a husband, as someone who, you know, tries to do creative work and tries to take on challenges. And sometimes you get setbacks. Sometimes you have success, and always wrestling with that and knowing that, you know, time can be short. And so it was an interesting kind of reminder of that, of use your time well. And I guess if we're talking about the narrative films here, I mean, maybe Roofman, Weapons, Predator, Badlands. I think those are probably, let's say, if I had to pick like a top of the list here, those are probably the top of the list. The Long Walk, I like that one. But for most of these films, they didn't really do it for me. So anyway, that's it for now. That's it for 2025. Let's call it that, you know. We'll come back in the next year in 2026 with some interesting new selections. And until then, have a safe and happy holiday, I suppose. Enjoy your time, and we'll talk to you next year. So until then, that's right. Go watch something new.